What is paganism? What is Wicca? Their belief systems, traditions, and rituals. Seen here, a lively dance to honor the festival of Ostara, to mark the vernal equinox, the coming of spring, and the fertility of the land. Who are some of paganism and Wicca's contemporary adherents? And what draws them to these spiritual paths? Welcome to Exploring Paganism. In this edition, we look at beliefs, festivals, and ritual objects as we join the Willow Dragonstone Pagan Community Coven, a progressive pagan community based in suburban Atlanta. Reverend Lydia M.N. Crabtree is Coven president, a high priestess and pagan rights advocate. She is also the author of Family Coven, Birthing Hereditary Witchcraft.
When you talk about paganism, you're actually talking about a large swath of people. And the way that Willow, our church, has defined it is that paganism deliberately sets itself apart from the doctrines of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and can contain some aspects of the former, but always is its own separate thing. So what that means for me is that we would view Hindus and the Baha'i faith and Buddhists, all of us believe that they are also pagan because they are outside of those big three main religions. So for me, in the faith world, anybody that's outside of those religions for me is in their own way pagan. And modern pagans in the Western world borrow and adopt a lot of those traditions and a lot of the things from those traditions. And then you have some other traditions who've gone back in time through archaeology and research and resurrected, if you will, the way things were done before Christianity ruled the planet. And these would be people who study the Eleusinian mysteries, which are all Greek, or people who are Asatru, which are Norse, or people who follow a Celtic pantheon, as I do. I think right now paganism is in a time of trying to commune with divinity in a way that it's never been before. But most people will see the earth itself as divinity, right? So in that manner, it is definitely a nature-based religion. And most pagans are very interested in conservation and recycling and trying to fight for the rights of the earth herself. Earth Day is always a big thing for Willow. We always do something on Earth Day that's pretty significant. And most pagans will as well. Some pagans will celebrate what we call 8 Sabbats or holy days. And these follow the cycle of agriculture. So it was really great. I was actually talking to a farmer just this week, and he was saying that he was taking the chicken waste and fertilizing and plowing over his field. This time of year is where we're celebrating between Imbolc and Ostara. And everything that has to do with those two has to do with the creation of the fertilizing of the field. So Ostara, the Easter egg, comes from the Catholic Church overlaying Easter with Ostara. And so the egg, actually, they would write wishes or health to the plants or whatever, and then they would plant it in the field, which it makes sense because that creates a fertile field, right? So Easter egg hunts in some stories come about when the priests began to pay children to go dig those up. So we don't Easter egg hunt. I don't Easter egg hunt anyway. I'll bury the eggs in my garden. So the Sabbats are Yule, Imbolc, Ostara, Beltane, Litha. And then we go to Mabon, Lunasa, Samhain, and we're back to Yule.
The cycle of seasonal festivals is known as the Wheel of the Year.
So, I mean, like for Samhain, it says, Halloween, the Earth Mother reflects her cronehood, meaning she's old, in the changing face of vegetation, the plants are dying. Silent suppers reflect the thin veil. A silent supper is often a ritual done at Samhain to connect with your ancestors. You come in and you eat a very small, specific meal, and you also lay out a plate for the person you're trying to commune with. So that's what is inside my beautifully done, this was actually a hand fasting gift. And I love how she has around here, it kind of says, day equal to night, the days are longer than nights, the light waxes full, the longest day, and then it goes around kind of telling you where the sun is in the sky and what it's doing. And then she also has done for us very carefully what is in spring, what is in summer and autumn and winter. So this is a really great one. So Yule is all the things that are pagan in Christmas. The tree, there's a great pagan song called Santa Claus is Pagan Too, you should look it up. The lights on the tree, giving of presents, all of those have rooted history in different European pagan traditions. So that's what Yule is all about, only we celebrate it on the 21st, and it aligns with the longest night of the year.
Tony Crabtree is co-founder of Willow Dragonstone.
Yule is one I really, really like. I like the story or the myth that of the Holly King and the Oak King. So most of the things average people think about when they think about Christmas, Santa Claus, the Christmas tree, I come from pagan myth. And the Holly King is my favorite character of pagan myth. And in our rituals at Yule, I usually am either the Holly King or the Oak King as one of the elder people in our community. So I enjoy doing that, and one of these days I'll get the full white beard, and I won't have any white hair, but I will have the white beard one of these days. And so that's probably my favorite.
Yule also resonates with Willow Dragonstone member Katie THACKREY.
I guess we'll start with the Sabbath that I'm most closely identify with would be Yule. I've always loved the cold. Like, my apartment is set to like 67. I don't want to be hot ever. So Yule is otherwise known as the winter solstice. And that, to me, was the first Sabbath that I showed up at Willow for. It was also the Sabbath where my husband and I started to really interact for the first time and kind of notice each other and be like, oh, hey, there you are. Like, let's hang out. And for me, it kind of has represented like rebirth. It's a time for me of reflection over what's gone on for the last year, and I think probably because it is so close to the calendar new year, for me that's just kind of how it works in my mind. But it's an opportunity for me to say, okay, how can I improve myself? What are my goals for the upcoming year, and where do we move forward? So that would be the Sabbath, or the holiday, if you will, that I kind of get excited about. And I think a lot of people in this community get excited about Yule. I don't know if anybody's talked about it or not, but it's kind of an overnight ritual, and everybody gets to play games and just have fun and be themselves.
From Yule, you go to Imbolc, and this has become Breeze Day. It's a European holiday, and it's all about creation of light, and it's about bringing the light in, and it's about preparing your hearth. During the Celts especially, would clean out their hearth and then relight it from a communal fire. So there's this whole idea of getting ready for the planting. And then at Ostara, you're one step closer to the planting, and between Ostara and Beltane, you're going to be planting. So you're doing your last minute preparations, you're planning what type of crops you're going to plant, where you're going to plant them, how you're going to plant them.
As part of Willow Dragonstone Community's Ostara observance, a ritual involving creative arts with a deeper meaning.
What we're doing is we're creating basically thought forms. They're think of them like little shadow bunnies. They're going to go on the astral plane, and they're going to eat negative aspects of ourselves and our ways of thinking to help us better be able to propagate the desires and things that we want in our lives. And when you do this, you have to be really careful, because otherwise you end up with bunny rabbits that just kind of go rogue and decide that they're going to do whatever they want. For instance, the expiration date is to keep them from living on much longer. If you, there are people who will talk about having made a thought form, them getting their own life of their own, because they didn't have an expiration date, so they just lasted forever, right? So so ours is expiring within a month because they have a really short task. Once they're done with it, they have no need to be around. But the other part that's really important is that we say harm to none, which is basically your security measure in all of your thought forms, because the last thing you want them to do is to take something that you've written, which is, oh, maybe you say, my bad body image issues, right? Well, maybe somebody's contributing to that. Well, you don't want them to decide that they're gonna go and, mess up that guy's life because he's part of the reason that you think that way. So harm to none is kind of a safety measure there for that.
And then between Ostara and Beltane, you've planted them. So at Beltane, which is the longest day of the year, the god and goddess marry, and it's a fertility time. So I've planted the crops and I really want them to grow. So I'm going to celebrate that with the maypole, which is the intertwining of male and female. I'm going to celebrate that by celebrating the ultimate marriage between femaleness and maleness, which creates life itself. So that's what Beltane is about. We're big on kissing at Beltane. That's a big thing. But also maypoles. They all start from these pagan traditions and association with the agriculture. Litha is a time when you're beginning to harvest the first crops, and those first crops typically are herbs. So Litha is all about the flowers and the herbs and the medicinal plants, and it's agricultural place. It's the place of continuing to do the work and waiting on the harvest. And that leads to the first harvest, which is Lunasa. And Lunasa is all about the harvest of the grain, because that's what's harvested next. And so beer and bread and all of those things are part of Lunasa. And then after Lunasa is Mabon, and this is regularly called the Witches' Thanksgiving, because for us, it's at the height of the harvest time. So we're thankful. We're seeing that our garden is actually producing things. And those of us who live in the suburbs are like, I have this little 10 by 10 plot, and I can eat something out of it. So we're getting all excited about that. And we get together, we renew our energy with our family and friends. So that's what Mabon is about. And then there's Samhain. And so Samhain and Halloween coincide with one another. And so all the things that you think about with Samhain are relevant, but they're relevant because this is the time when the plants are dying. Next Halloween, when you pull out your corn stalks to decorate your yard, ask yourself why you would do that. And the reason you would do that is because you're understanding that the planting time and the harvest time is over, and the land's no longer fertile. And that's what we talk about. And we do connect with our ancestors during that time. It's a very common aspect of what happens.
Samhain is a favorite Sabbath of Willow Dragonstone member Chinook Jar.
And not to be super cliched, but it's actually Samhain, which is where a lot of Samhain is where the modern practices of Halloween come from. Naturally, for me, it's a matter of ancestry. And for a long time as a kid, I didn't know a lot about where my family came from, especially being biracial and my father not being part of our family. There's a whole side of my heritage that I knew, essentially nothing about. So Samhain for me is actually a very important personal time for me to really dig in and do that kind of work and discover more about who I am and connect to that part of my history.
I guess Samhain, simply because that's the celebration of ancestors, and because of my mother. And we really don't have a whole lot of family history in my family. So I've had to do some research in order to find out where we all came from. But yeah, probably Samhain, because it just gives me a feeling of a roots, I guess is the best way to put it.
And then you're back to Yule, which is the rebirth of the sun, and the whole cycle starts again. They're actually what they call the 4 major Sabbats, or because you have the longest day and night, and then you have the equinoxes. So those create the cross that is the solar reflection for us. And then we also have what we call cross quarter days. That's how you come up with 8. So you have these Beltane and Samhain, and then you have the equinoxes, Ostara, and Mabon. I think that's right. Try to visualize it in my head. And then you have the cross quarter days. Those days are the other 4, and that's how you get 8 altogether. You know, many pagans will celebrate the Sabbats, which are the 8 big things. And then many pagans will also celebrate the Espits, which are full moons. And then some will celebrate new moons, which is when the moon is dark. So those holidays, especially in the Americas, have come to have names and meanings tied to the native peoples from America originally. And so that has kind of filtered into modern neo-paganism and filtered into how we look at the full moons. Typically in a community like ours, the full moon is the time for healing work, and people, you know, let's see, this year we've done a spell for someone to find a house, and I really think he's got one. I think he signed for this week. So, you know, we'll do a spell for that. Maybe we'll do a spell to heal someone. We have a member of our community who is fighting cancer. So we created a spell working for that. Those are the full moon is the time that we would do that. And I tend to believe that the new moon is the time for you personally to go before your own gods and to spend your own time in meditation. So there's a time for yourself, there's a time to raise energy with others, and then there's a time for the greater community during the Sabbats where everybody gets together.
A spell, explains Lydia Crabtree, is similar to what some might call a prayer.
When I was little, I used to pray, and then my grandmother said, well, if you visualize what you pray for, and that is truth. I mean, that's about what pagans are doing. The only thing that we do that's different is we maybe take it that one step further. So we may take a piece of rope, and maybe we're gonna say that it's green, and it represents the seeds I'm about to plant in my little garden. And maybe we'll take brown, and that represents dirt. And so then we're gonna take these two and maybe say a chant, plant and seed, harvest come to me, just off the top of my head. And so then you tie those together, tie it up, and then maybe charge it. And what I mean by that is put all of your intent in it, focus seriously and deeply upon it. And then I have a raised box garden, so then I would probably tie that to my raised box garden to encourage the nice growth of my garden. So that's the one extra step I would say that pagans tend to take it to. That's the next level of prayer. So this is, you know, you hear the Book of Shadows. Most of us are familiar with the one from Charmed. This is mine, and you can see it's just a scrapbook. And I have in here everything from prayers, that's what it starts with. And these are all the different prayers that I would say. There are rituals in here. There's a lot of just associations. So you see we have like wheels of the year of different types. And then I'll have the association of the wheel of the year, that's what that is. And then you have, for me, I have a bunch of different things in here that are all very specific to me and nobody else. I also have a section on crystals and gems, and this is pretty standard of what most people who are pagan, if they have one, will look like. Just a very traditional type of thing. This is a rosary that the pagans have adopted that type of thing, and I actually opened it to the Celtic Goddess Rosary page, and you can use a standard rosary, and there's all kinds of information about that on the internet. And I just thought I would point out that prayer for us is done in a very similar way than as it's practiced in many other traditions, Buddhism and Catholicism. So that's what we have there.
Now, would you start a book like that for your children?
I did. I started a book like that, and I kept it till my son was 18. And at 18, I offered it to him, and interestingly enough, he hasn't taken it yet. So my son has decided he's more Buddhist than he is pagan, which is fine. But he'll take it someday when he's ready. So this is our ancestor altar. Pagans do a lot of ancestor work. This is all has to do with different symbolism for Willow. And then this empty plate and cup would be used to give offerings to the ancestors if we had a feast or if we do cakes and ale during ritual. So that's what it's why it's a separate altar altogether. We created one just for that. A broom is also called a besom, and it was originally used to sweep away negative energy from a home. This is a folk thing that is still done in some European countries, specifically Scotland and Ireland. And so they also would hang a broom over the door. Mine is not, as you know, but that was a way to keep the negative energy. So the idea was if negative energy came in, it got caught in the bristles of the broom, and so then it didn't come into your home. So that's a besom. And the riding of the besom, or the riding of the broomstick, actually comes from the folk dance that used to be done right after the planting of the wheat. And they would dance in a static dance and jump in the air, and that's how tall the wheat was going to grow. So kind of like any other ecstatic dancer that you may have heard of, or even just a bunch of people having a good party because they finished planting a field. And so that's where that particular thing came from. Not everybody uses besoms. I have one because this is my house, but it's also a ritual temple, and so, and I got a really good deal on it. It was only 25 bucks. So that's how I ended up with my besom. The other big one is the cauldron. And I know you can see my really big cauldron that my husband and I rescued. And the cauldron actually represents the womb of the earth, or the womb of the goddess. And so when you stir the cauldron, you're stirring the fertility of life. And when you drink from it, you're drinking from the primal nature of inspiration. And that is what the cauldron represents. Then we have our regular normal tools that most witches have. An athame is a double-bladed knife. That is dull on purpose because you're not cutting people on the physical plane. It is used to direct energy and create things on the mystical plane, or the etheric plane. Then I also have a bowline, which is a curved-handled sharp knife, and it is what I use to actually cut herbs with for the purposes of spell working or ritual, or even as a sacrifice and gift to the gods.
Lydia's husband, Tony Crabtree, made the bowline, the athame, and did the leather work.
And it has he put a little plant on it so that, anybody who saw it understands exactly what it's for. Then I talked about the athame. This is my athame. I'm very interested in sacred geometry, so Tony, my husband, made sure that I had this beautiful this is actually the Merkaba, which is the highest symbol in sacred geometry. My athame is unusual because it is actually obsidian. And so it's a little sharper than most. But it's obsidian, and it was made by a man who hunted this deer with a bow. And the sinew and the bone are all from the same deer, and that's kind of what he does. He does a lot of that work. So this is mine. I was also going to show you Tony's, which is a little different. Tony actually forged his blade and then later put on a handle. So his blade is forged. But again, it's not meant to be sharp, right? Because we're not trying to hurt anybody.
And you would use those in ritual too?
We use these in ritual, and it's actually the idea is that you're sending energy into the handle that's galvanized through the metal or, the obsidian, and then that intensifies it into a single point, and then you can use that to direct energy. So all tools are a focus, all of them, and that's what this is. So we have a red candle to represent fire. We have a bell, and we also have an incense holder to represent air. We have a bowl with water to represent water, and then we have a bowl with salt to represent earth. These are the four elements. We talk about the pentacle, right? The pentacle is actually divided into four elements. So you have earth, fire, water, and air. And then the top point of that pentacle represents man's connection with divinity or the etheric. So that's why you see it everywhere you go. And there is indeed a pentacle on my altar that's brass. And that is what it's representing, the pulling together of those four energies on the altar to create or direct energy for some purpose. Then everybody is familiar with the pentacle. This is a place of focus. So if I was doing a work, I might put a candle right here, or I might put a written spell right here to focus my energy, to charge it. And I've mentioned before that the points mean the 4 directions, which would be air, fire, water, earth. And this direction here is divinity. So I like to think of Leonardo da Vinci's man, where he's standing much in this pose, his arms raised, and he's in a circle. That actually, for Leonardo da Vinci, was the symbol of man trying to connect with the divine. And in much the same way for us, the pentacle is us trying to connect with the elements and divinity. So that is the pentacle that you hear so much about. I think it's worth noting that most people will see it like this, which becomes it's become associated with Satanism, which is an entirely different religion, has nothing to do with us. But it does. There is a reason why a pentacle on a pagan would be pointed this way, and what it means is that they're doing an in-thinking. So instead of focusing on the divine, they're focusing on the divine in themselves and on their own issues. So you may see this in a pagan, but it doesn't mean they're a Satanist, and it actually has a very deep and personal spiritual message. You know, when I see someone like that, I know they're really digging, and they're really trying to become a better person and do some serious spiritual work. So there are reasons why pentacles would be pointed in various directions, and that's kind of how that has been misrepresented. The chalice is a big part of pagan culture. In fact, you'll often hear the saying, the chalice and the blade. The blade is the athame, and the chalice is the womb of the mother in miniature form, because cauldrons are really wieldy. And so when you have the chalice, and we are a fertility religion, we are tied to the movements of agriculture. So when you combine the chalice and the blade in one, what you're really doing is symbolically representing the union of maleness and femaleness. And I want to make sure I point this out. I mean maleness and femaleness not in the physical sense, but in the energetic sense, as in yin and yang. So male energy can be in anyone. Female energy can be in anyone. So in any way, shape, or form, those two can come together in the chalice and the blade and create something new and different.